Oh boy, this is so great. Fire all of the guns at once. Come on. Turn it up. My name is Mischke. Can you remember that name? Because if you can, it's going to be easier to find the show each week. There aren't a lot of Mischkes out there. There have been 375 Mischke families in America since the Civil War. That's it, 375. This ain't Smith, this ain't Anderson, okay? This is Mischke. I'd give you my first name, but you'd forget it. It's not memorable. Boy, this gets the blood pumping. Where would we be without music in this world? I think there would be a mass suicide. I think billions of people around the world would take their lives if there weren't music in this world. They would just disappear. Head out. Bye-bye. All right. I want to talk about research. I want to start out talking about research. Often in this world, you probably know this, there are studies completed by researchers. And the things that have been researched and studied in this world over the many years are varied and sundry. Do you ever occupy your mind contemplating all the things that have been studied in your lifetime? All the research that has gone on? And have you been involved in any of it in any way? Any of it? I have not. The whole world of research and study has gone on without my involvement. They don't include me. It's almost like I'm the kid in the neighborhood who isn't allowed to play with the other kids. All this research, all this science, all these studies being done year in and year out, I'm never asked to be a part of it. I'm the fat, awkward kid in the neighborhood who's just watching from the corner, wondering if I'll ever be invited in. Can Tommy play with you guys? When I was a kid, I liked to play baseball, and most of the kids I knew liked to play baseball. But one kid in our neighborhood, a kid named Huntley, that was his first name, Huntley, he would tell us that he wanted to do scientific research. We'd try to get him to play catcher. Nope. He said, I'm going to be doing some scientific research. He had the classic Coke bottle glasses, wasn't the least bit interested in sports, but he'd tell us all about his research. His dad bought him a chemistry set, I know that, and his dad bought him an ant farm and some other things. His dad would often gift him items from the Science Museum. But we'd say, want to play baseball, Huntley? Because we didn't keep out the little fat kid in the neighborhood. No. There were a lot of great fat guys in baseball. Wilbur Wood. Didn't Wilbur Wood play for Chicago? Knuckleballer, wasn't he? Was Boog Powell fat? Harmon Killebrew was a little chubby. Kirby Puckett. Kent Herbeck wasn't exactly svelte. No. So we always asked the kid in the neighborhood to join us in some capacity. Again, we often needed a catcher, and Huntley would be asked, but nope. We'd say, want to play baseball, Huntley? And he'd say, I'm doing scientific research today. And we would see him after the ball game with a magnifying glass and a leaf near someone's backyard. He was always by himself. Huntley did not seem unhappy. He just was into different things than we were. I grew over time to sort of admire him. I have never completed any scientific research. And I think there's a hole in my career in that respect, or at least a gap in my experience as a human being. I've not completed any formal research. My friend and I did some informal research one time as kids. We had heard from one of the dads in the neighborhood that fat men were jolly. One of the dads in our neighborhood had said that one night at a barbecue. I don't know if he was talking about Santa Claus, but we heard this dad in our neighborhood saying fat guys are generally jolly. And my friend and I decided to see if that was true. So we tested this particular hypothesis by going over to the Viking Smorgasbord. It was an all-you-can-eat operation, kind of a low-budget deal. And we sat outside that restaurant, and any time we saw a fat guy walking out, we threw a rock at him. Every time. And every single one of those supposedly jolly fellows got pissed off. Every one of them. There wasn't a jolly fella in the bunch once that rock hit him. We took our data over to the U of M. They didn't want anything to do with it. They shooed us away. We said, fine, continue to believe fat men are jolly. But research says otherwise. Now, that was not peer-reviewed research, and it should have been. I mean, even Huntley had his dad look over his results at the supper table. But as I mentioned, I've never really done serious formal research. As an adult, I do some imaginary research when I can't sleep at night. Sometimes I lie in bed imagining various scientific studies I could be taking on. And this always helps me fall back asleep. I'm usually researching whether guys who drive real old classic cars, 60-year-old cars, for instance, whether they die earlier, because in their minds they're living in another era when there was a shorter life expectancy. Or I study if they smoke while driving those old cars, is it possible they don't really know it's bad for their health, because the word wasn't out back then when those cars were made? And then I wonder if they really don't know it's bad for their health. I wonder then if there isn't almost a placebo effect that results in them not getting sick because they never tell themselves that smoking is bad. And does that make up for the lower life expectancy of the 1960s and thus result in their two beliefs canceling each other out and them dying right about when they're supposed to? I do this when I can't sleep. You probably do it too. We all do it, right? Everybody does that? And I'm always wearing a lab coat in my imagination. Most people who have never done research have never worn a lab coat, but there's something about imagining yourself in a white lab coat that just lends your whole presence a sense of gravitas and importance, and you feel like getting to work. So I always have a lab coat on in my imagination, and I have a clipboard. And again, if I can't sleep, I just move about the world, conducting research, imaginary research. Sometimes I find myself in Agatsirian New Guinea, checking out whether or not the end of the Asmat tribe's practice of shrinking heads has resulted in a newfound fondness for Mardi Gras beads as a replacement, or if they just don't wear necklaces anymore. What sorts of imaginary research do you guys do when you can't sleep? Here is some genuine research that I discovered over the last week. You want to talk about some real research? Okay, we can do that. This is real research from a science journal. If you have any say, you might want to avoid scheduling your next surgery on a Friday. The most comprehensive analysis of what happens to patients who have surgery on Fridays versus Mondays was published this past week in the Journal of the American Medical Association. It involved more than a dozen U.S. and Canadian researchers. They studied people who underwent all kinds of procedures right before the weekend and found that those people suffered on average more short-term, medium-term, and long-term complications than people who underwent surgery right after the weekend was over. They studied people who underwent all kinds of procedures right before the weekend, and they found that those people suffered, on average, more short-term, medium-term, and long-term complications than people who underwent surgery immediately after a weekend was over. The study covered all surgery specialties. It followed patients' outcomes at 30 days, 90 days, and 1 year. The study tracked whether patients died or were readmitted to the hospital, or experienced any other complications during their hospital stay. And people who received surgeries just before the weekend were overall more likely to experience complications than people who got the post-weekend procedure. Monday, Tuesday, somewhere in there. This is a little bit embarrassing. Doctors have more or less been busted here, doing surgery without their head fully in the game. They're half in the game, but they're half imagining a drink on the patio as well, with the ball game playing, and their feet up, and their pal Dennis dropping by. There's always some guy named Dennis dropping by. You ever notice that? 9 out of 10 patios I'm on in the summer, a guy named Dennis comes by. Anyway, these doctors are doing surgery best they can, but they keep getting lost in images of cold beer and chips and salsa. You are not receiving the best care on Friday, folks. They've already put in 4 days before this, and they're fried. I mean, they're going to try grafting a piece of a vein above and below the blocked area of your coronary artery there, but they're not as likely to pull it off with aplomb since it's Friday. Monday, they would get that blood flowing around that artery obstruction in no time, but this is Friday. The giveaway that you don't have the surgeon's full attention is that he's walked into the operating room in a golf shirt and a Panama hat. He's not all there, and there aren't supposed to be Mai Tais anywhere near the nurses, let alone the nurses serving them up. This is a Friday surgery situation, people. You're having a Friday operation. I hope you paid a lot less. It's a Friday operation. He's half on vacation. He's half in the bag. It's not an ideal situation, but he says, kiss my ass. This is a triple bypass. I'm half working on you, pal, half laying in the grass. My head is not in the game, and surgery is so lame. When there's a putter on a green somewhere, that's a carry in my name. No, I should not be here, and I'm afraid, my dear, that I'm not giving you my best. By now that should be clear. You can call me a lout, but you're about to bleed out. I tried to fix you from my lawn chair. That was stupid, no doubt. But if you survive today, please come back Monday. I'll be back in fine form, and I'll get you squared away. But I'm sorry, till then, I'll be at the cabin with a fishing pole and beer, wondering if I did you win. Say hello to the Lord. Tell him I was just bored. My mind was on the weekend, fella, and your plight I ignored. Oh, yes, your plight I ignored. Ha, 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 ha. Pass me another Mai Tai. Okay, it says here, researchers also found that Friday surgeries are more likely to be performed by junior surgeons when compared to Monday surgeries. I repeat, researchers also found Friday surgeries were more likely to be performed by junior surgeons compared to Monday surgeries. This difference in expertise may also play a role in the differences in outcomes. Wait a minute. Junior surgeons? First time hearing about this. Junior surgeons? Aren't they supposed to be doing surgery on cadavers only? You let them work on living people? Are you told you're getting a junior surgeon? Or is one simply supposed to assume that when you realize your operation is scheduled on Friday? Junior surgeon? I don't think surgeries should be handled the same way haircuts are. I mean, when I was a kid, I went to the barber school. My folks didn't have a lot of dough, and there were 8 kids in the family, so my mom sent us all down to the barber school, where haircuts were $1 apiece, and where we knew the guys were screwing up all the time. But it wasn't a life-or-death situation, so we didn't care. I came home tons of times with my ear cut or with half my head sprouting longer hair than the other half. Sometimes I'd come home with the apron still on. They had forgotten to take the apron off. But that was haircuts. We have a surgery version of this now? You say you're a junior surgeon, huh? That concerns me, fella. I'm uncomfortable with that. Oh, don't be. Don't be. The good news is that I'm super into this. Yeah, I'm really into this surgery. I'm not like the doctor thinking about the weekend and his golf game. I am fired up and I am all in. The bad news is that the reason I'm so excited is this is my first surgery. Do you mind if I draw a little circle on your chest so I can remember where your heart is? It's left side, not right. Correct? On the cadavers, it would sometimes be the opposite, because someone would operate and forget to put the things back together the same way they were, so the next guy to operate would get all messed up. I remember pulling a kidney out of a man's rectum one time. I had to double-check the anatomy book. Turns out someone had screwed up the day before, putting that guy back together. I knew it. I ended up having to quickly return the kidney using a broom handle. The sad thing was the next day was my debut in the operating room for real, and I was a wreck. Plus, it was Friday. My head was not in the game. I was imagining the comic book convention that weekend. I had free tickets for me and my cousin Ernie. Anyway, your concern is what? That I'm a junior surgeon? I want to say that the very fact that they wanted to research whether or not doctors' heads were in the game on Fridays tells me that they already had a feeling their heads weren't in the game on Fridays. And the only way they would ever think that is if they found too many examples of Friday's surgeries going awry. Too many examples of doctors screwing up surgery on Fridays. Too many examples of doctors showing up for surgery in sweatpants with a Bud Light cap on. I mean, why would they ever investigate this in the first place? They must have run into way too many cases of simple surgeries going off the rails on Fridays. Doc, it was a simple tendon repair in the ankle, and your patient has just been found in the recovery room with a couple of pacemakers sewn to his forehead. What the hell happened? Yeah, these folks were researching something they already knew the answer to. They knew doctors were no good on Fridays. This research was just a formality. And speaking of death, I'll be back on the other side of this break to talk to a woman who immersed herself in America's views of death and wrote all about it. Stay tuned for Shannon Dawdy right after this.
Let me have a look in your mouth. Say, ah.
This happened one time. A man stayed in the park at SeaWorld in San Diego after closing time to fulfill his dream of swimming beside a killer whale. And, well, he was killed by that whale. The man's parents sued SeaWorld, alleging that it did not warn the public that these whales can kill. Now, this is a personal injury case that Bradshaw and Bryant would not take on. After all, the whale was not referred to at the zoo as Buddy Old Pal Whale. Nope, he was called Killer Whale. Killer Whale. But your case they will take on, and it won't cost you a thing to lay it all out for them. They'll tell you what you need to know. Again, at no cost. Call Bradshaw and Bryant with your personal injury case, because they do a whale of a job, they have killer instincts, and they know how to swim with the sharks. Find Bradshaw and Bryant at minnesotapersonalinjury.com. Shannon Lee Dawdy traveled across the United States talking to funeral directors, talking to cemetery owners, talking to death care professionals, as well as just ordinary people from all walks of life, asking them a couple of questions. What did they think happened when we all die? What do they think happens when we die? And what did they want done with their bodies when their own death came around? What was their preference? Just those questions by themselves can send you down some interesting roads, as Shannon learned, and she wrote about it in her book, American Afterlives, a wonderful and very original book that I greatly enjoyed. She learned about an astounding array of death practices, death rituals that people take part in or that they organize for their loved ones recently deceased. She uncovered what is sort of a quiet revolution in death practices in America, including DIY home funerals, green burials, all sorts of different things. Surprising and creative things that mourners are doing with the ashes of the cremated. She learned that there have been greater changes in the way Americans treat death in the last decade than in the 100 years before that. Her book is really a rich tapestry of views and practices surrounding death. And reading it leaves one viewing Americans as wildly individualistic in their different takes on the end of life. I welcome her to the show now. Hello, Shannon.
Tommy, nice to meet you.
I was intrigued to learn that there were some things that happened in your life that shifted your attention in the direction of death. You lost a significant number of people close to you in a relatively short period of time. Is that at least a piece of the story with you in terms of the genesis of this book?
Absolutely, it is. It was definitely the personal experience of losing people and seeing all the different options that family members and loved ones were choosing, both for the disposition of the body and for the rituals afterwards, that really alerted me to how quickly things were changing. And I became very interested. I think that researching and understanding is also, for me, a way of processing grief.
When I was born, and I learned this from your book, when I was born, 95% of Americans, regardless of religion, were pretty much on board with embalming, an open casket, and handing over tasks to a funeral director. Quite odd when you think of how diverse this country is and has been, that we were kind of all on board together with this one idea of how things should be handled when someone dies.
There was this idea that the unique body represents the unique individual. And so the special treatment and preservation of the body became part of that individualism.
And for folks who might be inclined to say, well, why was that so odd that in the early 60s, 95% of Americans, regardless of religion, would be on board with embalming and an open casket and handing over tasks to a funeral director? We were oddly unique on this planet. I learned from your book that Americans have been viewed by people in other countries as a little odd when it comes to how we have agreed to handle this death process.
That's right. Even in, one of the cultures that we kind of hold to be very similar or an ancestor culture to our own, which is, British culture. British reaction in the mid-20th century, when they started to really pay attention to what was happening with American death practices, was highly critical. And they were really the ones to start to identify and articulate how strange American death practices were. And yeah, the popular embalming and viewing never happened anywhere else. Canada, a little bit through American influence, would be the closest.
If you went to Europe, you wouldn't have seen it?
No. The embalming, there might be viewing in Catholic settings. That was an option, although often it would just be the family, not everyone attending. But the embalming, preserving the body, that was a particularly American thing.
We really need to give credit or blame to the Civil War for embalming because of how many families expected soldiers to be returned to them, soldiers killed in battle, and what an arduous task that was, and how necessary some form of preservation would be in such a situation. And the wishes of these families were coming along at a time when there was at least some rudimentary science allowing for some preservation, correct?
That's right. Yeah. And that seems pretty well established by the history, that it really took off in terms of technology and the popularization in the Civil War. It still begs the question, why were Americans, and it was particularly in the North, so insistent on getting their war dead back? Because again, like say with all the wars in Europe, that hasn't been a recognized right. In some ways, I think it has become an American culture, and you can see this in other wars too. I mean, we still have like ongoing MIA projects funded by the Department of Defense trying to bring back the war dead from World War I to recover remains and return them to their families. That's a uniquely American thing that is one of the genealogical strands behind this embalming practice. I will say that I think that, again, British observers going back to the 1700s who were visiting, traveling, writing travelogues about the American colonies also observed another practice that I think is related, which is that people would open the coffin right before burial to look at the face of their loved ones, what was called the last look, to kind of capture a picture of them so they could remember them and recognize them in heaven so that they could be reunited. They wanted to remember what their loved one looked like.
It makes sense in a world where there aren't photographs, I suppose. I got to get a good hard look here so I can remember, so when I'm in heaven later, I can spot this fella.
Yeah, that was some of the reasons given. Other reasons, and this is also the reason for like a 3-day wake, is you also wanted to verify that they hadn't been simply in a coma. Now, why this particular practice was so strongly developed in the US and not in European cultures, I think that is an interesting question.
I would sure love to know what the Europeans would think learning about what's being done in America today, being cremated and put into paint for an artist to paint your portrait, or cremated and turned into ink so that a loved one can get a tattoo with you in it, having your ashes used in a decorative paperweight or a piece of sculpture or a diamond made out of it. And then I know people who have donated their body to an outdoor forensic anthropology lab so scientists could study human decomposition. My father-in-law donated his body to Stanford University, and his big argument was, hey, they only have it for a year, and all expenses are paid after that. So we'll get a nice urn, they'll pay for it, they'll pay for the cremation. I know there are people out there who try to arrange Viking funerals. I've heard of people arranging Viking funerals. They send their body out into a body of water on a boat and then set the boat on fire. I know one guy who has been buried at sea, wanted to be buried at sea. And I'm not even getting into all the personalized stuff that happens with caskets or all of the green burial stuff that is becoming more and more popular, where embalming is off the table entirely, as is any container having any metal or any plastic or any screws. Some people are getting buried just in a shroud. The big thing you learn from your book is that it's all breaking up. This 95% picture has been breaking up into pieces, and it's a world of individuals deciding that they're going to go this other unique way that they like, that they heard about, that they came up with, that they made up, or that their cousin told them about. It's sort of a free-for-all now.
That's absolutely right. You've really said it quite well, what the main point of the book is, or my main discovery.
And there's some sense, the same way I talked about the Civil War being the kickoff for this embalming insistence, there's some sense that 9/11 is a kickoff for a new way of thinking, that somehow that represents, to some degree, an end of a certain era. We all, as a nation, got to see on 9/11, 2001, we all got to see people who were never going to see their loved ones again. There weren't going to be any bodies retrieved. These people were going to have to accept that their loved one was gone. I forget what the percentage is of people who were never found. Nothing was found. I don't even think DNA was found in a lot of cases.
Yeah, it was a very high percentage. That's my argument. I didn't set out to make that, and no one else had made it, but I just started looking at two things: sudden acceleration in the rate of cremation. The popularity of cremation since the early 1960s had been creeping up, but it really took off after 9/11 exponentially. You can graph this and you can just see it take off. The other thing that really happened with 9/11 was not just that suddenly it was impossible to recover the body and make the body the center of the ritual in the embalming and open casket way. It would be inhumane to say that any other way of grieving or mourning or honoring them was unsatisfactory. Whatever we had to do had to be satisfactory, and people had to get creative about how they were going to mourn somebody whose body was not present. And so that, I think, kicked off a lot of creativity about it.
In your book, while specific religious approaches to death may be fading away, a spiritual sense of what is going on here and the importance of the spiritual understanding of what is happening here is actually growing.
Yes, I mean, that was one of the findings that I, from talking to people on the street, also some of the professionals in the death care industry, that really surprised me. I had set off on the project assuming, once I started to see the pattern, that there were all these new and different and non-religious ways of commemorating the dead. I thought what we were seeing was an increase in what you might call secular death. But what I found was not secularism. It was more spiritualism that in some ways goes back to that early 19th century American spiritualism, talking to the dead, believing in ghosts. About 50% of Americans believe in ghosts. That's about the same percentage who attend religious services or affiliate with an organized religion. But what's interesting is that it's an individually led spiritualism, like what is meaningful for you and your family. There's a rejection of authority. People aren't generally looking for leadership to tell them what is the soul or what is the afterlife or what should I do with my loved one. Less and less are they looking for authority. There's kind of like what we're seeing in questioning science. People are also like questioning religious leaders. But that doesn't mean that they're necessarily turning atheist. What they're doing instead is, I need to make this life on earth meaningful, and I need to understand my loved one as continuing in some form. So I'm going to come up with a ritual that asserts that, and I'm going to come up with a ritual that feels healing to me. And I'm the best authority as to what makes me feel better with my grief. Nobody else can tell me and school me on how to deal with my grief. And so I think that's a large part and really interesting part of the story that we're seeing.
As you look across the country right now, when it comes to practices after death, there is a greater demand in the population for what is called a green burial than there are opportunities to have a green burial. If you're hoping that you could take your loved one, wrap them in a shawl or a sheet or a shroud, and just put them in the ground to decompose, you may find that a wonderful way to handle the death of a loved one, but good luck finding that opportunity. If there were more opportunities, according to your book, there'd be far more people taking advantage of it.
Yes, I think so. I mean, I think anyone who's determined can find this opportunity. It's always been there, even throughout the 20th century, with strong embalming popularity, because in Orthodox Jewish beliefs and in Muslim beliefs, they're very anti-embalming and anti-cremation. So those cemeteries for those believers, or sections of cemeteries that are set aside for those groups of believers, have always had to be green. And so one thing you're seeing are cemeteries that are large and diverse in terms of the populations that they serve, expanding what was their Orthodox Jewish section to take in people who are not Orthodox Jewish or Jewish at all, but want a green burial. And that part of the cemetery is growing. Some cemetery operators who are really seeing this as the future are either starting new cemeteries or converting older cemeteries into almost entirely green cemeteries. You also see, this is something that I think will be the future, but it hasn't taken off as quickly as it has in Europe, which is what are called conservation cemeteries, which are more like either burying or scattering ashes in a nature preserve.
For those who wonder about this, embalming fluid is pretty toxic. But cremation, according to your book, is not a green approach to taking care of the body. It's apparently a whole lot of energy, big old carbon footprint, and not any better than embalming.
The carbon footprint is much larger, actually, for cremation. There's a lot of misunderstanding about this because of the fuel burned for the incinerators. Also, all the carbon of your body, or like 99% of it, goes up into the air. In fact, there have been, at least until recently, EPA controls on crematoria because it can become such a problem locally.
That's the number one choice in America today, cremation.
Slight majority.
Okay. I got this from your book. I think that there's a strong movement to keep parts of people around more. And I don't mean that in a macabre way, but I mean some sort of way to have them still be around and maybe even talked to.
That's right. Yep. I'm sure we're familiar with the mantelpiece urn, right? It was never a majority practice in terms of you would take them home and put them in an urn on the mantelpiece, but it goes back to the 1880s about it was reviving in some kind of weird way a classical Roman thing to do with ashes, although they had like special little houses where the dead would live and they would visit the dead there in cremated form. So this has always been around. What's happening now, though, the mantelpiece urn has been a subject of a lot of jokes. Cat knocks it over, and then you have to vacuum it. I came across some 19th century articles when it was still quite controversial, where people were accidentally using it as pepper and eating the ash. People prefer, if they're going to have the dead home, to have them in a more stable form. I think that's one of the reasons that you're seeing so many objects made out of cremated remains, out of the ashes, so that it can't be spilled or ingested or lost. And the other advantage that a lot of people are finding about, say, cremation jewelry, whether it's rather expensive artificial diamonds made with the cremated remains, or say just a tiny little vial or heart-shaped locket that's sealed that has a little bit of ash in it, or a piece of art, is that you can take a little bit of ash and make multiple objects so that it's not just one mantelpiece urn that one member of the family gets to have or is responsible for, but everybody has a memento, has a presence of that person with them.
You found that it's just very common for these people who have a memento to talk to it.
Yeah, yeah. And it's not that people are super literal about it, that they really think that the person can hear them, but it really helps them to focus. It's almost like a meditative object. There's something about just having that object with that essence that helps them focus on that person when they want to remember them.
My guess is at least half of people who have lost a spouse talk to them after they're gone. And I base that on the number of people who have told me that they routinely talk to them, and not talk to them as in they don't hear. They talk to them as though they can hear them. It's astounding how many people I know who have told me that, and it's a very casual part of a day. In the years following the death, they still keep them around in some way without even any talisman.
And I think that that's totally valid. It's not strange superstition. I mean, I have done this. My father died in 2008. You know, he was a complicated figure, but one thing I could rely on him for is that he had my back and he was my protector, and he was also a pretty maverick thinker. So if I'm facing a difficult situation or a difficult decision, I, in my imagination, talk to my dad and ask him what he thinks I should do. And that answer is always quite different than anyone in my living, any of my living family or friends, the kind of advice they would give. And I follow it, and it's true for me. I trust it. I trust what Dad would say.
I want to tell you about a new sponsor I have, and their business name is my new favorite name in the whole world, American Pressure. American Pressure! They sell pressure washers, people, not the silly little ones you rent up the street at your little hardware store. This is for serious work. American Pressure. They also are the service kings when it comes to repairing heavy-duty pressure washers and maintaining that type of equipment, whether they sold that equipment to you or not. They're wizards with this pressure washing stuff. They sell parts and accessories, too. They do it all. American Pressure. They feature a full range of pressure washers and steam cleaners. If you have not spoken with them on the phone, you're missing out. You got to meet your guys, your new guys. They actually answer their phones, answer and talk to you. They actually solve your problems, whatever they are in this industry, this world of pressure washing. American Pressure, family-owned for decades now. Tell your friends in the industry about them. Tell them Mischke's found a new winner. American Pressure. Learn more at AmericanPressure.com.
Another thing I came upon often was people who readily would tell me stories of, middle of the night, my deceased wife, I woke up in the middle of the night, she was sitting at the end of the bed and we talked for a little bit. People casually mentioning these things. I mean, you mentioned this 50% of Americans believing in ghosts. I don't know who it was who said it years ago. He said, America is a nation full of closet mystics. I think we're a nation with all sorts of connections of some spiritual sort to some other realms. Many of us just kind of keep that to ourselves.
I found the same thing when I traveled the country talking to people. Yes. People are embarrassed. I wasn't going after that kind of information, but once they became comfortable with me, maybe towards the end of an interview, it would come up. I did kind of person on the street interviews, but also I was interviewing a lot of professionals, including funeral directors. And, they try to be ecumenical and, they serve lots of different people and they try not to have a strong opinion about death or practices. They're just there to serve and facilitate whatever it is people want. But when I got them to talk about their personal experiences, these same kind of ghost or presence stories would come up. One guy talks to the person that he's embalming. I think that's really not uncommon with embalmers. I found embalmers to be a really interesting group of people. They have a very strong sense of responsibility to the dead. And I think they feel like they have a talent or an intuition as to what the dead want. And there was another case I describe in the book of one of these death care designers where they make glass objects, kind of paperweight type orbs. And I visited them in their studio. And I asked them at some point, the people that are buying these objects, I can tell from the website, they tell stories about things happening. And they talk about, it's not the thing, it's not the orb, it's mom, it's John. And I asked them what they thought about that. And they kind of gave a very polite answer. And then I paused. And in that pause, they kind of looked at one another. This was a father and son who run the business. And then they just launched into all kinds of other stories that were their personal stories. And one of them, they were making one of these orbs in the studio. They have a pretty controlled process. They've been doing this for years. They know what they're doing. And as the orbs were cooling in a cooling kiln, it kept shattering, exploding. I think it happened 3 times. Finally, the guy, he calls the funeral director saying, look, was there something up with this individual? Were they going through some unusual chemo or medical things? Is there something in the cremated ash that could be causing this chemical reaction in the kiln? And the funeral director said, no, it was a young man who died in a car accident and he was killed by the glass of the windshield. What this guy said is that his interpretation is that this young man, who is now some sort of spiritual entity, did not want to be put in glass.
And these orbs were being made out of the cremated remains?
Yes.
Was it your father's ashes that were thrown over the bridge railing into the water?
That's right, yeah.
And that was in some sort of biodegradable white box of some sort?
Yeah, it was a beautiful kind of pressed, Japanese pressed paper with flowers in it. Yeah.
The ashes in the box hit the water and go to the bottom. Was this a river?
Yes.
Bubbles start to come up from the box.
We're just watching. We didn't know how long it might take the box to disintegrate, and we didn't know what to do next. And we're about to step away. We see these giant fish appear, I don't know from where. And they started, it was about, I don't know, 5 or 6 of them, started checking out the box. And then they started swimming in a circle around and around the bubbling box.
So obviously, this is a very moving moment for you. Anytime any of us are at the point where we're letting go in more ways than one of these ashes, and there they go, and they go down, and they're in the water, and this is a holy moment in many ways for you. And then you're watching these fish in this sort of ritualized circle around the box, and for you it was a profoundly spiritual moment.
Yeah, I mean, I think part of the reason it felt spiritual, and this, I guess, resonates with what I found with other people I talked to, is that it was so kind of magically individualized. This was perfect for my dad. He told big fish stories, and it was funny, and he was funny and irreverent. And somehow nature cooperated and told us, yeah, he's going to be okay, and he's still around in some form.
You traveled all over the country, and I started out this interview by saying you were asking a couple questions. One, what do you want done with your body after you die? Another, what do you think happens when you die? The what do you think happens when you die is interesting, because you can see this when you ask someone. They kind of look up toward the ceiling, and you don't know where they're pulling this out of. A combination of things they've heard and stories they've read and what the minister told them. And they're almost like fishing a little bit for, well, what I think is, I'm always intrigued by this question. I'm intrigued by the fact that you went around asking it. My father-in-law, lifelong Catholic, devout Catholic, all his life just seemed to live and breathe his Catholic faith. On his deathbed, I happened to ask him, what do you think's going to happen when you close your eyes for good here, when it's finally over? And he said, well, Tom, I have absolutely no idea what's going to happen. In the end, when the rubber met the road, he didn't really have anything to go on. And I was just taken aback by the sense of, well, you are at where somebody might be at who had no faith in anything.
I mean, that's an incredibly honest answer, right? We're not sure that anyone's really come back with a reliable report of what it's like on the other side. There are, of course, those who have had near-death experiences. And although I haven't written about it in the book, I wrote about it later in an article because I had a close friend who died 3 times in 24 hours from cardiac events in quick succession. He's got a PhD. He's a really smart intellectual, former atheist, I would say at this point. But he had an incredible experience that shares so much with what other people who've had not just near-death experiences, but technically dead for a minute or two experiences. He saw the classic white light, and he felt an incredible sense of peace and love and belonging. And he said it was such a nice place to be. It's actually been hard to be back here on Earth sometimes.
I am convinced one day science is going to find a way to induce that in us. And by that, I mean a safe way for us all to die for a couple of minutes.
Mm-hmm.
We're all going to come back after and go, okay, that's great. No need to worry about that anymore.
Yeah. No, it is. It's fascinating. And one thing that people are doing now, and I think it's an interesting question whether this really does approximate the near-death experience, psychedelics. The revival of the use of psychedelics in now, as opposed to the 60s or 70s, more medicalized settings, it's now being applied experimentally among the dying to kind of practice what it means to die and to get comfortable with the sort of spiritual realm that people anticipate. Because some psychedelics do seem to have that effect, mushrooms and ayahuasca in particular, where people will have these trips where they thought that they had died. And so there's a lot of experimentation and curiosity about that right now.
The most powerful thing I read was a Yale study with psilocybin people who had less than a year to live. I don't think they were quite in hospice, but terrified of death. And a single dose in a clinical setting of psilocybin, I don't know how much, but enough to give them a bit of a ride, made all that fear vanish. And not just gone for that day, that week, or that month. It was gone.
Yeah, no, it's fascinating. And I do think the fear of death, I mean, I do agree that other people have written about this. It's really fascinating. A guy named Ernest Becker, who was a philosopher, anthropologist, and psychoanalyst, quite a Renaissance man, wrote about the denial of death and the fear of death and the profound psychological effects that fear has on us and even on our culture, and how our fears get transformed into aggression. But the root fear is the fear of death. Somebody recently asked me that there's a Chinese translation of the book. It's the first time any of my books have been translated into another language. I'm delighted that it was Chinese, and I've been interviewed by Chinese journalists. And one of the questions I just answered last night was, what about the reception of the book? How have people reacted to the book? And I had to pause on that. And it's different I wrote it for a general audience, but also for some academics or to be used in the classroom. I tried to write it for a couple different audiences in mind. But when I really thought about what reactions have stuck with me, it's where people reached out to me to say, your book really helped me. And this includes like older people who are in their 80s and, realistically approaching their own end. And that just has meant the world to me.
Didn't it have that same effect on you?
Yes. I think it has helped me process the fear and to be comfortable. These very stories that we're talking about of so many mysterious spiritual experiences have made me suspend my disbelief. Even though I'm a scientist at heart, I don't find that at this point in contradiction with all this evidence for something beyond our current capacity of explanation.
In your travels, asking people, what do you think happens when we die? What do you think is going to happen when you die? In only a couple of cases did you find people who deliver to you kind of the classic traditional Christian heaven story. People just kind of were going off more in individualized directions. Maybe they borrow a little something from this religion and a little something from this, but that was intriguing to me.
Yeah, and that was a surprise to me. And quite a few of my, interlocutors were in the South, conventionally thought of as more Protestant Christian. I was surprised.
The internet has introduced people to so many different views all over the world, so many different takes, that there's been this amalgamation, this blending, people going off in directions that are not a set dogmatic approach.
Well, I think also we've just become, we see this in our current political situation too, we've become so suspicious of all kinds of authority. I think people are starting to believe whatever they get a little bit of confirmation of in their personal experience or comfort from. Reincarnation, actually, I had more people reference some form of reincarnation as their belief or their supposition. And that was also a little bit of surprise. It's not a well-articulated, detailed, worked-out idea of reincarnation as you might find in Buddhist or Hindu beliefs. We're certainly influenced by those.
Again, the exposure to different takes has grown exponentially in the last quarter century. That cutoff of 9/11 happens to also be the time that the internet really took off.
Right. Good point.
I just find all of this utterly interesting and fascinating. I think I read one time a quote, Thomas Mann said something along the lines of, all interest in death is just another expression of interest in life.
Yeah, that's a great quote.
So I just love this topic, and I always feel invigorated afterwards. I always feel more alive after talking about it, and certainly after reading your book, American Afterlives, that was the result. So it has that effect.
Oh, thank you for saying that. I really appreciate it.
I think it was Montaigne, a French philosopher, who said that to begin depriving death of its greatest advantage over us, let's deprive death of its strangeness. Let's frequent it. Let's get used to it. The idea being that it actually can work in your favor in life. Another good reason to read the book. So good work, and thanks for all your efforts.
Thank you so much. It's been a delight talking to you.
You as well. Good luck to you. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Shannon Lee Dawdy, American Afterlives.
I recently sat in Josh Arnold's office and took a good hard look at that man. Josh Arnold, he's an investment advisor, someone you probably need in your life. You just don't know it yet. Anyway, I looked at this kindly older man who's been helping people understand the market and their money for decades. A guy who has seen it all. And I said to myself, now there's the face of a solid, decent human being. There's someone I can trust. I was soothed just being with him. Josh Arnold loves working with people, helping people. Let Josh help you with your retirement savings investment opportunities, your 401k, your IRA. Let Josh Arnold show you how to make it all grow. It costs nothing to have a 48-minute chat with Josh Arnold. Nothing. 952-925-5608. Rewind this and scribble down the number. Tell Josh Mischke bossed you around and demanded you call him.
Investment services offered by Josh Arnold Investment Consultant LLC, a security and investment advisor. Past performance is no guarantee of future results. All investments involve risk. Tommy Mischke is a paid endorser.
Hey, this is Rose. Leave a message.
At the tone, please record your message.
Hey, Rose, this is Mischke. Thought I'd find you. I'll try again some other time. You're one of the rare women who have contacted me in a text letting me know I can give them a ring. There aren't a lot of women. We need more women on the callers list. You women out there listening now, you need to text me at 651-321-8949, letting me know I can give you a ring sometime. Very male-dominated, my callers list. Sorry to miss you, Rose. I'll try again some other time. You can count on that. 651-321-8949.
Hello, this is Paul.
Paul, it's Mischke calling.
No. How goes it?
Going all right on my end. How about yours?
Pretty good. I'm down here in New Mexico.
What city?
Albuquerque.
Albuquerque. I just got done talking to a woman all about death. The whole topic was death. She went around the country asking people what they think happens when you die. I thought I'd pass that question on to you.
I think about it a lot. I only have one app that I've ever paid for, and that is an app that reminds me 5 times a day that I'm going to die, so that I never lose sight of death. I have a 6-year-old son who talks to me a lot about death and will ask what happens. And the first thing I say is, I don't know. And then I say, what I hope happens is that wherever we came from God, we came from love, we came from mystery, that we get a return in fullness to that God, to that love, to that mystery. And then my youngest will say to that, I hope we can be born again, back into new bodies and find ourselves a family again. Even though my background is in religious studies and spirituality and the Christian contemplative tradition, I try not to hold on to what I think it is, but really steep in the mystery and allow myself to be enfolded back into that, whatever it may be.
Now, you're in New Mexico, and you say you're steeped in the Christian contemplative tradition?
That's right.
You're in the state that's home to Father Richard Rohr, are you not?
That I am. I work at the organization that he founded.
Ah, so you have some sense then of the Christian mystical approach.
That's it. I'm a big devotee of Meister Eckhart.
Yeah.
Eckhart really makes my socks roll up and down with his vision.
You have your app that reminds you 5 times a day you're going to die. You're going to die! I have St. Thomas Aquinas, who happens to be my namesake. One of the great Catholic theologians, perhaps its greatest in terms of written work. Yet, at the end of his life, he had a profound mystical experience, something that caused him to look at everything he had ever written as having no more weight than straw. And he retired to a room in contemplative prayer to live out his days and die. Something happened to that man that was some sort of awakening that made our puny little takes on what's really going on seem puny indeed.
Hear, hear. That is a great example. The greatest mind comes to the point where they say, it's all straw. I have nothing left to say. To me, that's the turning of the page to the mystery that's always been waiting. I think that's a huge gift to be steeped and to learn from the likes of folks who have those kind of mystical turnings in their life.
Universally, what seems to come out of these experiences, these deeply, deeply profound spiritual experiences, is the inability to put it into words. And, of course, that was Thomas Aquinas' problem. There were no words that he could offer anymore that did justice to it. There wasn't any point in talking. That seems to get closest to what would be the kind of truth I could imagine, is that anything that the human brain could attempt to logically address would probably not be close to reality. I've enjoyed talking with you. I just wanted to check in. I find it ironic that coming right out of the break after talking with a woman for an hour about death, I happen to call someone with a paid app that reminds him he's going to die 5 times a day.
The only one I'll probably ever pay for. But anytime, Mischke, I'm around. I'll be sure to pick up whenever you call.
What's the app called?
It's called We Croak.
We croak. We croak. And how does it remind you that you are going to croak?
It has a little notification that pops up. It says, don't forget, you're going to die. It's a great motivator for me to remember my companion death. It's here right next to me, making me stay alert to how I'm engaging in the day-to-day.
I appreciate your time, and I will talk to you again sometime.
All right, looking forward to it. Thanks, Mischke, and thanks for the new podcast. Loving every minute of it.
Thank you. I appreciate that. So long.
Take care.
Yes?
Hey, James.
Oh, hey, Mischke.
How you doing?
I'm doing pretty good. How about you?
Swell. Where am I finding you?
I'm just playing a video game right now, nothing much. I just passed my driving tests, actually.
Used to have quite a few kids listening in the old radio days.
Yeah, my teacher told me that he used to listen to you back in college.
So what do you want to do with your life?
I've always been drawn to entertaining others. That's always been what I wanted to do. I've always wanted to... I don't want to just be like another everyday person. I want to be known. Like if you search up my name into Google, I want to kind of see myself one day. That's my plan.
You want to be a well-known person.
I don't want to be like super well-known like Bill Gates or Elon Musk or Donald Trump, but good enough.
And what's the attraction?
Just like the idea that my name isn't just gone eventually after 80-some years. I like the idea that I left some sort of dent on the world.
So fame for you is equated with a kind of immortality, at least for a spell. The idea being that the more well-known you are for something, the more you feel you will have made a splash, and making a splash is important to you.
Yeah.
but you don't know how you would like to make that splash.
I'm trying YouTube right now. That's going pretty good. You're probably too old and don't really care, but it's Minecraft content. That's what I try to do.
Minecraft content. Yeah, I'm out of the loop on that. Could you become famous for Minecraft content?
Oh, yeah, definitely. I was raised on 2 YouTubers that did Minecraft content. That's probably what inspired me.
What do you think happens when you die?
I have no clue. I don't think there's ever going to be a clear answer to that.
Question number 2. Were you to die, God forbid, in the next week, how would you like your services handled? What would you like done with your body?
Well, I'd like to be burned and put in a jar and put on someone's shelf.
Cremated, put in a jar, maybe a mason jar, and set on someone's shelf?
Actually, a mason jar wouldn't be such a bad idea. My dad makes some pretty darn good pickles.
Next to the pickle jar, on a shelf, there are your ashes.
Yep, perfect.
How about in terms of a service? Would you like any specific kind of service?
I guess whatever's the cheapest.
So how did you come across my show?
My dad, he's 50 years old. Back in middle school, he introduced me to one of your CDs, Best of Tom Mischke. And now a bunch of your first best moments are ingrained into my brain forever. Like, I had me a beautiful wife, 3 kids in their teens. They just wanted a waffle, man, I feel god awful. They were blown to smithereens. Come see me in the morning. That's forever in my mind.
The Black & Decker.
Black & Decker Spacemaker Optima T1000 toaster. What the heck kind of a name is that for a toaster?
Well, wonderful, James. I've enjoyed talking to you. Thanks for making yourself available, letting me know that I can call you.
Yeah, I enjoyed talking to you, too. It was an honor, and you're a very awesome man.
Thank you, James. That's very kind of you to say. I hope to talk to you again sometime. You be well.
Yeah, you too. Bye.
Big news. The Consumer Product Safety Commission renewed efforts this week to advise consumers to stop using Black & Decker Spacemaker Optima T1000 toasters. You hear that? No more Black & Decker Spacemaker Optima T1000 toasters. Yeah, these things are dangerous. They want Black & Decker to knock it off. So if you got a Black & Decker Spacemaker Optima T1000 toaster, don't use it, people, because it can blow up your home and leave a gaping crater in your neighborhood the size of Poughkeepsie. If you got a Black & Decker Spacemaker Optima T1000, I want you to take it right now. I want you to pick it up by the cord. I want you to swing it around over your head like a flaming lasso and chuck it out a second-story window so it can plunge to earth, landing with a mighty crash, never again to destroy another American family. Are you people listening? Are you listening? How many have to die before you people settle for cold bread and get rid of these death traps? I would have been suspect the moment anyone slapped a name like that on my toaster. What the hell kind of a name is that for a toaster? Sounds like the name of a frickin' doomsday machine. Black & Decker, Grim frickin' Reaper, Spacemaker Optima, Satanic T1000. Why'd you buy one of those? Get rid of them now, out the windows, off the rooftops, to the streets below they go. Smash, crash, bash 'em up, mash 'em up. Before they're used to make any more toast. Black & Decker saying it isn't a big deal. They're saying don't worry about it. They're saying leave it plugged in. The toaster's no great threat. Oh, yeah? Oh, yeah? You want to tell that to my wife and kids? Well, you can't, because they're no longer with us, thanks to your little toaster. They just wanted to heat up a couple of frozen waffles, that's all. Was that too much to ask? Simple little God-fearing, humble American citizens with hatred for no one and a love of life that was exceeded only by their love of waffles. Did they love waffles too much? Apparently they did, because that's what did them in. That and your God-forsaken, evil incarnate, Black & Decker, Prince of Darkness, Space Maker, Casket Maker, Grave-digging, T1000, Corpse Machine. You want to tell me again how it's not that big of a deal? Is that what you want to tell me? Because it's pretty lonely at my house these days. You know what a lifetime of grieving, coupled with zero toast and cold, hard, frozen waffles is like? Come and see me in the morning. Round the break of day, yeah. Wanna see me hug my pillow? Look out! Okay, well, all right. I had me a beautiful wife, 3 kids in their teens. They just wanted a waffle, man, I feel god awful. They were blown to smithereens. Come and see me in the morning